if you would give esteemed audience kind of an overview of your background, we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm Allie, and I have a middle grade book out right now called Ghost Girl, and my second middle grade book coming out, also from Catherine Teigen Press, HarperCollins, is This Appearing House, which is going to be out on the 16th of August. And I have been writing a variety of things for a pretty long time. I mostly started out with poetry, and then I did some YA. And then I decided that after and we might talk about this, but after a very arduous experience with the publishing world, decided that either I'm going to write the things that matter to me the most, or I'm never going to write again. And that wound up being middle grade horror. I don't usually call them spooky stories. My publisher does, and I love them for that. But for me, I feel like I write horror, and I think writing horror for kids is important. And it, we'll probably get into that too.
We can get into all of it, but we can start right there. Why is it preferable to call it horror rather than spooky?
So it's not that it's preferable. I think it's just, for me, it's a choice. I'm trying to destigmatize the idea of writing horror for children. Like, I'll just tell you a small side story. So publishing is a really weird space. And when I found out that I was getting Ghost Girl, my first book, published, I couldn't tell anyone until it was announced in Publishers Weekly, and that wasn't going to happen until the contract was done. And for reasons that I don't fully even understand, that took about 5 months, which was a really long time to keep the secret of my life.
Slow drying ink couldn't.
It was like they went back and forth about like royalties and like foreign rights, and it was just, you know, you got to nail it. It went much faster on the second one because it was like, we'll just do the same thing again. But it was a long time keeping a secret. I mean, I told my family, obviously, and some close friends, but I couldn't talk about it publicly. And I work in an archive. And I had a researcher come in, and she happened to be a biographer who wrote the biography of my favorite writer in the whole world. And I'll just leave it there. And I kind of got a little starstruck. So when I saw her and I was giving her the material she asked to see, I said, hey, you know, I'm getting my first book published. And she was very generous. And she's like, oh, that's wonderful. Like, what? Congratulations, this is so exciting. What do you write? And I was like, well, I write middle grade horror. And her face just dropped. And she was like, wait, like for children? And I was like, yeah, like, you know, scary stories, like for kids. And she looked me dead in the eye and she was like, I would never let my children read something like that. And I don't know. I just had this moment where I was like, wow, you're the first person outside of my family that I told this to. And like, obviously you don't know me and you don't owe me anything, obviously, but like, that was your reaction. And that's just wild. And I just kind of made a little pact with myself that like, this was something I was always going to be really proud of, because the fact of the matter is, scary stories were the things that mattered to me when I was a kid. My mother, I love her forever, but she was very protective and very worried about scary stuff entering my life, which is fair because I had like ridiculous nightmares. So it's like, it was for her protection too. So she could like, you know, sleep through the night and not have to deal with me. But like, these things were always kind of kept from me, you know, and it was the kind of thing like I would sneak read scary stories to tell in the dark out of like the school library, and I'd read like one story or two stories and put it back on the shelf. And I decided after like a whole publishing fiasco with a YA book that I had, that I was gonna write stories for the kid that I was and the kids that are out there today that like scary stories. So it's not that there's a difference between spooky and scary. I think it's just a difference that I make. Because I think it's okay for kids to read scary stories. And I think it's important actually for kids to read scary stories. And I think this is how we teach kids that the world they already know the world is scary. They already know that. They live here. I mean, God, look at the last few years. Like, they know the world is scary, and I feel like scary stories, it's what arms them. It's what puts a sword in their hand and tells them, yes, you can defeat the monster. Because middle grade scary stories make a pact, and that pact is, yes, I will take you into the dark. Like, I, the author, will take you into the dark, but I will bring you back out to the light by the end of the book. Like, that's the pact that we make. That's the trust our readers have in middle grade scary stories. And I think that's important, and I think it matters. So yeah, I don't like to, wow, that was a really long-winded answer. I don't like to, I mean, the word spooky is fine. It's fine. It's totally fine. I just also think, like, this idea that we're like somehow traumatizing kids by telling them scary stories is just nonsense. And so I use the word scary.
Something you said specifically about horror, that horror trusts its reader, that middle grade horror trusts kids.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that I think that horror trusts, especially middle grade horror, especially trust kids that they're ready for it. Because I think the thing is that we as adults tend to do is we do a lot of gatekeeping, you know. I'm like, I worked as a librarian, and I was a children's librarian for a period of time, and I saw the amount of gatekeeping that happens. And it's like, we decide what kids can handle. And the thing I love about middle grade horror is that it trusts the kid to handle it, because it's a safe scary. I mean, that's what it is, really. It's not real. And the kid knows that as long as they close the book, it's over. Like, if it's too much for them, they'll walk away. My niece walked away from my book. She was like, absolutely not, I'm good. You know, and it trusts kids. It trusts that kids can handle what they can handle, that the kids who need to walk away will walk away, but that the kids who want to be there get what they're looking for. And I think, you know, like, horror also, much like comedy, elicits a physical reaction, and that's a hell of a thing, you know. I mean, that's a lot. Like, yeah, I think that middle grade horror looks at, like I said before, looks at a kid and says, I'm going to take you into the dark, but we're coming back out to the light. Don't you worry. Like, it's going to be okay. Let's go fight some monsters.
I agree with 95% of what you said, because of course, I'm a fellow horror author. I 100% agree, and a longtime horror fan, and was as a child also. Except for the part that at any point I can put this book down and walk away and over. No, my friend, we've all read just that right horror novel that even if you didn't read it to the end, it had that moment that stayed with you forever. And that's what's so wonderful and insidious about horror, as that little kid breaks off and follows you home for life.
I agree, because you know, like, you know, growing up, I'm older than the appropriate age that was like Goosebumps. So I was more of a scary stories to tell in the dark kid. Mary Ha Down, no, I'm forgetting her name, but Wait Till Helen Comes is the name of the book that absolutely did that thing to me, where I was like, well, I'll never not see this again in my head. Thank you. But also, I read Stephen King at like far too young an age. But I think a lot of us did, you know. I mean, I had two older sisters, and my first oldest, she's not so much with the horror, but my oldest sister, absolutely, her shelves were nothing but King. And I used to sneak into her room and read like 3 pages when she wasn't there, read a chapter, and like leave like a little marker so I know where I left off. So, you know, you're probably right. There is definitely that moment where it's like, oh, I've done the damage, haven't I?
Yes, but I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing. I think it can be a very, very good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reaction. It elicits a response, like a really intense response. And I think that is amazing that a book can do that. I think books should all do that.
The other nice thing about, whether it's Pennywise the clown or whatever monster floats your boat, shark from Jaws, fine, is it gives you a nice imaginary, not imaginary, but a place to hyper focus all that fear and get it off of your plate for a moment, so you can focus on other things. Because
Yes.
as you make it very clear in the book, where that's not the ghost that we're afraid of, it's all the things that we're projecting onto the ghost, and the fears we're not actually speaking in the name of, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's literally exactly what I put in the book. It's like, it's not the ghost you're afraid of, it's what the ghost represents. And you're right. Like, that is the cool thing about horror, is you can take all the things in the world that you're afraid of, and you can then be like, spin them and project them onto whatever like character or movie monster or slasher you're experiencing, and be like, oh, that's the bad guy. It's not all of the things that I have anxiety about.